When attention becomes the goal, attraction quietly disappears. Most people believe that to be chosen, especially when competition feels endless, they must stand out by doing more, giving more, proving more. Yet emotional depth operates by a completely different law. It does not shout, it resonates. It does not chase, it anchors. Emotional depth is not created through effortful performance, but through presence. The moment you stop trying to secure attention and instead cultivate inner stillness, you shift the dynamic from surface-level interest to something far more powerful and rarer: psychological attachment. Attention can be divided endlessly. Emotional depth cannot. A man may be surrounded by admiration, flirtation, options, and validation, but those things remain external. They touch the ego, not the core. Emotional depth reaches the internal world where identity, memory, and meaning live. This is why someone can be desired by many yet emotionally bonded to only one. Depth creates imprinting. It leaves a psychological trace that lingers long after conversations end. When you activate emotional depth, you stop interacting only with his behavior and begin interacting with his inner state. Instead of responding to what he says, you sense what lies beneath it. Instead of trying to entertain or impress, you allow silence, curiosity, and emotional safety to exist. In that space, something subtle happens. His nervous system begins to associate you with calm, clarity, and grounding. This association is not logical, it is biological and psychological. But the mind seeks stimulation, but the psyche seeks regulation. Many options stimulate, very few regulate. Emotional depth is felt when you are comfortable not filling every gap with words. When you listen without trying to guide the conversation toward approval. When you allow moments of quiet without anxiety. Silence, when held confidently, becomes magnetic because it invites projection. He begins to bring more of himself into the space. He speaks more openly, reflects more honestly, reveals thoughts he did not plan to share. This is not because you pulled it out of him, but because you created a container where it felt safe to emerge. Safety is not passive. It is an active emotional signal. It communicates that you are not overwhelmed by intensity, not threatened by vulnerability, not dependent on outcome. When someone senses this, their defenses lower without effort. They begin to show you parts of themselves they usually protect. This is where depth forms, not through grand gestures, but through emotional permission. Trying to impress keeps the interaction on the surface. Depth requires authenticity. Authenticity does not mean oversharing or emotional exposure for effect. It means alignment between what you feel, what you say, and how you act. When your words are not designed to gain a reaction but to express truth, they carry weight. People feel the difference immediately. There is a grounded quality in someone who is not trying to be chosen, only to be real. Depth also grows when you resist the urge to compete. Competition signals insecurity, even when masked as confidence. When you compare yourself to other options, you unconsciously place yourself on the same plane. Emotional depth comes from operating on a different level entirely. You do not need to be better than others when you are incomparable. This happens when you stop referencing them internally at all. Your energy becomes self-contained. He senses that you are not reacting to scarcity, not strategizing for advantage, not measuring your worth against invisible rivals. This self-contained presence is rare, and rarity creates focus. Emotional depth is also built through emotional attunement. This means noticing shifts in tone, pauses, contradictions, and emotional undercurrents without interrogating them. You do not call attention to them directly, but your responses acknowledge them subtly. When someone feels emotionally understood without being analyzed, they experience relief. Relief creates attachment. Being seen without being exposed creates trust. Trust deepens when you allow him to arrive emotionally at his own pace. Rushing intimacy, whether emotional or psychological, collapses depth. Depth unfolds gradually through shared moments that are not forced. When you allow the connection to breathe, it gains gravity. Gravity does not pull by effort, it pulls by presence. Another crucial element of emotional depth is emotional sovereignty. You are not using the interaction to regulate your self-worth. You are not waiting for his response to decide how you feel. This independence is not coldness, it is stability. When someone feels stable within themselves, they become a grounding force for others. A man with many options is often surrounded by emotional volatility. Someone who remains steady without withdrawal becomes unforgettable. Steadiness communicates that you are not trying to extract something from him. You are not seeking validation, reassurance, or certainty. You are sharing an experience, not negotiating value. This removes pressure. Without pressure, authenticity rises. Without authenticity, depth cannot exist. Depth also requires emotional courage. This is the courage to remain open without attachment to outcome, to express warmth without clinging, to show interest without fear of loss. When you operate from courage rather than fear, your energy shifts from contraction to expansion. Expansion feels inviting. Fear feels demanding, even when subtle. When you speak from emotional depth, your words slow down. You are not rushing to fill space or impress. You choose words that reflect inner clarity. This rhythm affects the other person unconsciously. Conversations feel less like exchanges and more like experiences. Time behaves differently in emotionally deep interactions. Minutes stretch. Attention narrows. Distractions fade. This is why emotional depth outcompetes novelty. Novelty excites briefly. Depth anchors permanently. A person with many options is constantly stimulated but rarely nourished. Emotional depth nourishes. It provides psychological rest. The mind may wander toward options, but the psyche returns to what feels grounding. This is why emotional depth does not need repetition. One moment of true emotional resonance can outweigh countless superficial interactions. Depth also invites introspection. After interacting with someone emotionally deep, people often reflect. They replay conversations. They notice emotional shifts. They become curious not only about you, but about themselves. This self-reflection ties your presence to personal insight, which strengthens psychological attachment. Emotional depth is not something you perform, it is something you embody. It grows from self-awareness, emotional regulation, and comfort with uncertainty. When you embody it, you do not need to persuade anyone to choose you. Choice becomes a natural consequence rather than a goal. The paradox is that the moment you stop trying to be chosen, you become someone who is chosen. Not because you withdrew or manipulated, but because you shifted from seeking attention to offering presence. Presence is scarce. Presence is grounding. Presence is unforgettable. In a world full of noise, emotional depth feels like silence that understands. In a world full of options, it feels like home without confinement. This is why doing this once is enough, because depth does not fade when attention moves elsewhere. It stays, quietly influencing perception, memory, and desire long after the moment has passed. Detachment from outcome is often misunderstood as indifference, coldness, or emotional distance. In truth, it is none of these. Detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the absence of dependency. It is the internal state where your sense of worth, safety, and identity is no longer tethered to how someone else responds to you. When this shift happens, something profound changes in how you are perceived. Your presence becomes lighter, clearer, and more magnetic, not because you are trying to attract, but because you are no longer asking to be chosen. Most attraction dynamics collapse under the weight of expectation. When you want something too much, your energy begins to lean forward. Even if you say all the right things, the body communicates need before words ever do. Need creates pressure. Pressure triggers resistance. A man with many options is especially sensitive to this because he is already navigating constant demands, projections, and emotional pulls from different directions. The moment he senses that someone's emotional stability depends on his decision, his nervous system tightens. Detachment dissolves this tension entirely. Radiating self-worth begins internally, long before it is visible externally. It comes from the quiet knowing that you are complete whether someone chooses you or not. This does not mean you don't care, it means you care without collapsing inward. When you hold this posture, your energy stops asking questions like, "Am I enough?" or "Will I lose this?" Instead, "I am grounded in myself." This internal orientation subtly shifts the power dynamic. Power, in emotional terms, always belongs to the one who can remain present without attachment. Detachment creates emotional neutrality, and neutrality is magnetic. When you are not pushing for an outcome, the other person has space to move toward you freely. Desire cannot grow where it feels forced or evaluated. It grows in open emotional terrain. Detachment creates that openness. It removes the invisible contracts we often bring into interactions, the unspoken expectations of reassurance, commitment, or validation. When someone senses that you are not trying to secure them, curiosity replaces certainty. Curiosity is a powerful driver of attraction. The mind leans toward what it cannot fully predict. Detachment introduces unpredictability, not through games or withdrawal, but through authenticity. You respond honestly, not strategically. You show interest without agenda. You enjoy the moment without calculating the future. This authenticity cannot be imitated convincingly, which is why it stands out so sharply. Self-worth radiates most strongly when it is not announced. You do not need to assert boundaries aggressively or prove confidence through dominance. True self-worth is quiet. It shows in how you handle pauses without anxiety, in how you don't rush to explain yourself, in how you allow misunderstandings to exist briefly without panic, in how you don't overextend emotionally to secure connection. These small behaviors signal something powerful. You trust yourself. Trust in oneself is deeply attractive because it signals emotional maturity. A man with many options is often surrounded by emotional volatility, people who oscillate between intensity and withdrawal, confidence and insecurity. When he encounters someone whose emotional state remains consistent regardless of his behavior, it creates contrast. Contrast creates focus. He begins to notice how different the interaction feels. Calmer, clearer, less draining. Detachment also shifts how rejection is perceived. When you are detached, rejection does not threaten your identity. This removes defensiveness and bitterness from your energy. Ironically, when rejection loses its power over you, it often doesn't happen. People are drawn toward those who are not afraid to lose them. Fear of loss creates tension. Freedom creates attraction. Radiating self-worth means you no longer negotiate your value through effort. You do not overgive to be liked. You do not tolerate misalignment to preserve connection. You do not shrink your needs to avoid conflict. Instead, you allow compatibility to reveal itself naturally. This makes your presence feel clean and honest. There is no hidden agenda, no emotional debt accumulating beneath the surface. One of the most misunderstood aspects of detachment is that it actually deepens emotional connection rather than weakening it. When you are detached, you can engage fully in the present moment. You are not distracted by future fears or past disappointments. Your attention is undivided. This quality of presence is rare. People feel when they are being met without expectation. It allows them to show up more fully as well. Detachment also disrupts comparison. When you stop measuring yourself against other options, you stop emitting competitive energy. Competition signals insecurity even when subtle. Detachment signals abundance. Abundance does not mean having many options. It means not needing to cling to any. This inner abundance is sensed immediately. It changes how others position themselves around you. They begin to lean in, not because they are chased, but because they feel chosen by the interaction itself. There is also a spiritual dimension to detachment. It aligns you with flow rather than control. Control is rooted in fear, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of being unchosen. Flow is rooted in trust, trust in timing, trust in self, trust in life unfolding. When you move from control to flow, your energy becomes more relaxed, more authentic, and more attractive. People feel safer around those who are not trying to control outcomes. Radiating self-worth also means honoring your own emotional rhythm. You do not rush intimacy to secure attachment. You allow desire to build naturally. You are comfortable with pacing. This patience signals confidence. It tells the other person that you are not afraid of time, that you trust the connection to reveal itself. Time becomes an ally rather than a threat. When detachment is embodied, it changes how you respond to inconsistency. Instead of chasing clarity, you observe. Instead of demanding reassurance, you assess alignment. This shifts the dynamic from emotional reactivity to conscious choice. You are no longer waiting to be chosen, you are choosing as well. This mutuality is felt intuitively, and it elevates the interaction. Self-worth also expresses itself through emotional boundaries that are not rigid but clear. You do not need to explain or justify them extensively. You simply act in accordance with them. This consistency builds respect. Respect is often overlooked in attraction dynamics, but it is foundational. Desire without respect fades quickly. Respect without fear endures. Detachment does not make you distant, it makes you grounded. Grounded people are emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. This balance is rare and deeply appealing. It allows intimacy to grow without entanglement. It allows desire to exist without anxiety. When someone with many options encounters this energy, something shifts internally. They are no longer evaluating you alongside others. Comparison fades because the experience feels different, not louder, not more exciting, but more real, more sustainable, more peaceful. Peace is underestimated in attraction, yet it is what the psyche ultimately seeks. Radiating self-worth also means you are not afraid to let go. You trust that what is aligned will stay, and what is not will leave. This trust removes desperation from your energy. Desperation repels not because it is wrong, but because it signals inner scarcity. Detachment signals inner fullness. In this state, you no longer perform to be desired, you simply are. And in being, you allow others to meet you authentically. This authenticity becomes the deciding factor, even among countless options. Not because you demanded choice, but because your presence made choosing feel effortless. Detachment is not something you do once and forget, it is a posture you return to. And the moment you embody it, you stop competing for attention and start attracting genuine interest. Not through strategy, but through self-respect made visible. Creating space is often mistaken for pulling away, playing games, or withholding affection. In reality, true space is none of these. Space is not absence, it is openness. It is the emotional and psychological room that allows another person to step forward on their own terms. When you stop giving and directing a connection, you do not weaken it, you give it structure. Structure is what allows emotional investment to form naturally rather than through pressure. Many connections fail not because there is no attraction, but because there is no room for desire to grow. Desire requires tension, curiosity, and freedom. When everything is available immediately, the nervous system has nothing to move toward. Space introduces movement. It allows longing to emerge without manipulation. Longing, when unforced, transforms into investment. Overgiving often comes from a good place. It is driven by care, enthusiasm, and the desire to connect deeply. But when giving becomes a way to secure attachment, it silently reverses the dynamic. Instead of two people moving toward each other, one person begins carrying the emotional weight of the connection. This imbalance reduces the other person's need to invest. Emotional investment only occurs when someone feels they have a role to play, something to contribute, a space to step into. Creating space means you stop filling every emotional gap. You do not immediately respond to every message out of anxiety. You do not explain your feelings to ensure understanding. You do not preemptively meet every emotional need before it is expressed. Instead, you allow moments of uncertainty to exist without rushing to resolve them. Uncertainty is not a threat when held calmly, it is an invitation. When you allow space, curiosity awakens. Curiosity is the bridge between attraction and attachment. It pulls attention inward and forward. A man begins to wonder what you are thinking, how you feel, what it would be like to move closer emotionally. This wondering is not created by withdrawal, but by presence without overexposure. You are there, but not consuming the space entirely. Silence plays a crucial role in this process. Silence, when not charged with anxiety, becomes fertile ground for emotional investment. In silence, the mind fills in gaps. It reflects, it replays interactions, it assigns meaning. When you are not constantly providing stimulation, the other person begins to generate emotional energy internally. This internal generation is the root of attachment. Creating space also means allowing him to initiate. Initiation is not about control, it is about agency. When someone initiates, they invest. They move from passive recipient to active participant. If you always lead, plan, reassure, and advance the connection, you unintentionally deprive him of the opportunity to invest emotionally. Space restores balance by allowing him to step forward. This does not mean becoming distant or unavailable. It means responding rather than chasing, engaging rather than pursuing. It means letting interest unfold rather than forcing momentum. Momentum that is forced feels unstable. Momentum that emerges organically feels solid. Space also allows emotions to breathe. When emotions are constantly discussed, analyzed, and processed in real time, they can lose their depth. Not everything needs immediate articulation. Some feelings need time to mature internally. When you allow this, the emotional bond becomes richer rather than diluted. Another essential aspect of space is respecting emotional pacing. Everyone has a different rhythm when it comes to vulnerability and commitment. When you allow space, you honor his pace without abandoning your own. This mutual respect creates emotional safety. Safety does not mean stagnation. It means the freedom to move forward without fear. Creating space also shifts your focus inward. Instead of monitoring the connection constantly, you return to your own life interests and emotional center. This inward shift is not avoidance, it is grounding. When you are fulfilled independently, your interactions become lighter. You are sharing your life, not asking someone to complete it. This makes your presence more desirable because it is chosen, not needed. When you stop over-giving, you also stop over-functioning emotionally. Over-functioning creates dependency on one side and passivity on the other. Space restores mutual responsibility. Each person becomes responsible for their own feelings and contributions. This equality strengthens attraction because it removes emotional burden. Space also amplifies value. What is always available is often unconsciously devalued, not because it lacks worth, but because the nervous system adapts quickly to constant access. Space reintroduces appreciation. It allows moments together to feel intentional rather than habitual. Creating space requires emotional strength. It requires trusting that connection does not disappear simply because you are not managing it constantly. This trust is felt. When someone senses that you are not afraid of losing them, they feel freer to choose you. Freedom is paradoxical in attraction. It invites commitment rather than repels it. Space also encourages self-reflection in the other person. When you are not constantly present to distract or reassure, they turn inward. They assess how they feel, what they miss, what they want. This internal dialogue strengthens emotional clarity. Clarity leads to choice. Importantly, creating space does not mean suppressing your needs. It means expressing them without urgency or fear. You communicate boundaries calmly and allow the other person to respond authentically. Space gives their response meaning. Without space, responses are often reactions. With space, they are choices. When a man begins to invest emotionally, he does so not because he is pushed, but because he feels drawn by the openness, the calm, the absence of pressure, drawn by the sense that stepping closer is welcomed but not required. This voluntary movement is the foundation of lasting attachment. Space also protects your own emotional integrity. When you stop over-giving, you stop draining yourself. You preserve your energy, your clarity, your sense of self. This self-preservation is not selfish, it is sustainable. Sustainable energy is attractive because it promises continuity rather than burnout. In creating space, you transform the connection from something that is being managed into something that is being discovered. Discovery keeps desire alive. It keeps attention engaged. It allows emotional investment to deepen over time rather than peak and collapse. Ultimately, space allows choice to emerge naturally. Not through persuasion, not through effort, but through freedom. When someone chooses you in freedom, that choice carries weight. It is rooted in genuine desire rather than obligation or momentum. By creating space, you are not stepping back from the connection. You are stepping into a position where the connection can grow on its own. And when growth is self-directed, it becomes enduring. Mirroring his inner world is not about imitation, strategy, or emotional performance. It is about perception. Most people react to behavior because behavior is visible and immediate. But behavior is only the surface expression of something deeper. When you respond to actions alone, you stay on the surface. When you respond to the inner world beneath those actions, you move into psychological intimacy. This shift changes everything because it speaks to the part of a person that is rarely met and almost never understood. Every action carries an emotional cause. Distance often masks overwhelm. Confidence can hide uncertainty. Humor can protect vulnerability. When you mirror behavior, you often miss the truth underneath it. When you mirror the inner world, You acknowledge the emotional reality without forcing it into words. This creates a profound sense of being seen. Being seen at this level does not excite the ego, it soothes the psyche. Most people try to influence behavior. They react, correct, reward, or withdraw in response to what someone does. This creates power struggles and emotional loops. Mirroring the inner world bypasses all of that. Instead of asking, why did he do that? You sense, what might he be feeling, and respond to that emotional state rather than the action itself. This response feels unexpectedly accurate, even when nothing explicit has been said. When someone feels emotionally mirrored, they experience coherence. Their internal world, which is often fragmented or unspoken, suddenly feels reflected back to them in a calm and non-threatening way. This reflection creates safety. Safety allows emotional openness. Emotional openness deepens attachment. Mirroring does not mean fixing or reassuring excessively. It means acknowledging without controlling. For example, instead of reacting to withdrawal with pursuit or accusation, you might respond with steadiness and warmth that signals understanding without pressure. This tells his nervous system that he does not need to defend or explain himself to remain accepted. Acceptance without submission is rare, and rarity creates attachment. Responding to the inner world also prevents escalation. When behavior is met with reaction, intensity increases. When emotion is met with understanding, intensity dissolves. This regulation effect is powerful. The nervous system begins to associate you with emotional balance. Balance becomes desirable, especially for someone who lives in a world of stimulation, expectation, and performance. Mirroring the inner world requires emotional intelligence and restraint. It means you do not personalize everything. You recognize that moods, distances, and inconsistencies often belong to someone's internal process rather than to you. This recognition prevents you from reacting defensively. Defensiveness blocks connection. Emotional neutrality opens it. When you stop reacting to behavior, you also stop feeding patterns. Many relational dynamics persist because reactions reinforce them. When you change the response, the pattern loses energy. Mirroring the inner world introduces a new dynamic, one where emotional truth matters more than control or outcome. This approach also preserves dignity on both sides. You are not chasing explanations. You are not demanding clarity prematurely. You are allowing emotional states to exist without judgment. This dignity is felt. It signals maturity. Maturity attracts because it promises stability rather than chaos. Mirroring creates a subtle emotional leadership. Not dominance, not submission, but guidance through presence. When someone feels emotionally dysregulated, they unconsciously look for regulation. If you provide it calmly, without trying to fix or manipulate, they begin to rely on your presence emotionally. This reliance is not dependency, it is trust. Trust forms when someone realizes they can be fully themselves without being punished, rushed, or misunderstood. When you mirror the inner world, you communicate, I see you as you are, not as you perform. This is deeply disarming. Performance drops. Authenticity rises. Responding to emotion rather than behavior also changes how conflict is experienced. Conflict no longer feels like a threat, it becomes information. You sense what is happening beneath the words and respond to that. This prevents power struggles. Power struggles kill attraction. Emotional attunement deepens it. Mirroring also allows desire to remain alive. When behavior is controlled or corrected, desire contracts. When emotion is understood, desire relaxes and expands. A man does not feel managed or evaluated, he feels accompanied. Companionship at the emotional level is profoundly attractive. This does not mean ignoring harmful behavior or abandoning boundaries. It means addressing behavior without emotional reactivity. You can hold boundaries while still mirroring emotion. For example, you can acknowledge stress or confusion while remaining clear about what you accept. This combination creates respect. Respect sustains attraction far longer than compliance. Mirroring the inner world also makes interactions feel intuitive rather than scripted. Conversations flow differently. Responses feel timely and accurate. There is less need for explanation because understanding precedes language. This creates a sense of emotional resonance that is difficult to articulate but easy to feel. People often remember how someone made them feel more than what was said. When you mirror the inner world, you make someone feel emotionally coherent, accepted, and calm. These feelings imprint, they linger, they resurface in memory during moments of stress or uncertainty. This is how psychological attachment forms quietly and deeply. Mirroring also shifts the focus away from outcome. You are no longer trying to get a specific response. You are responding to what is present. This presence is felt as authenticity. Authenticity builds trust faster than strategy ever could. When a man with many options encounters someone who mirrors his inner world, the comparison game ends. Other interactions feel transactional, reactive, or performative. By contrast, yours feels real. Realness cuts through abundance. It creates preference. This is because mirroring meets a fundamental human need: to be understood without being dissected, to be accepted without being controlled, to be seen without being exposed. When this need is met, attachment forms naturally without persuasion. Mirroring the inner world also protects your own emotional energy. You are not riding emotional highs and lows based on behavior. You remain centered. This centering is stabilizing. Stability is attractive because it promises emotional safety over time. When you consistently respond to the inner world rather than surface behavior, the relationship dynamic deepens organically. Communication becomes more meaningful. Silence becomes comfortable. Presence becomes nourishing. Ultimately, mirroring the inner world invites him into himself. It allows him to feel more whole in your presence. People are drawn to those who help them feel more themselves, not less. This is why this approach does not need repetition or reinforcement. One experience of being truly emotionally mirrored can outweigh countless interactions based on excitement or attention. Because when someone feels deeply understood without being handled, they do not need to be convinced to choose. The choice feels natural, quiet, and inevitable. In the end, being chosen is never about doing more, saying more, or proving more. It is about being more aligned with yourself than with the outcome. When you activate emotional depth, you move beyond surface attraction and touch the psychological core where real attachment forms. When you detach from the need to be chosen, you radiate self-worth that cannot be competed with or replaced. When you create space, you allow desire and investment to arise naturally, without force. And when you mirror his inner world rather than reacting to his behavior, you offer something rare: emotional understanding without control. Together, these shifts change the entire dynamic. You stop chasing attention and start offering presence. You stop managing the connection and allow it to unfold. You stop reacting from fear and begin responding from awareness. This is why the choice becomes effortless. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy made choosing feel calm, safe, and real. What ultimately draws someone to choose you, even among countless options, is not intensity, availability, or strategy. It is the experience of feeling grounded, understood, and emotionally free in your presence. That experience lingers. It reshapes perception. And once it is felt, it cannot be forgotten.